Hello, everyone. In this episode, we're going to look at some Cherokee Freedmen records that you can find that might reflect your family before the Dawes era. You know the Dawes rolls, 1898 to 1914. But we're going to look at some records came before that time that might help you to enhance your family story. Now, if you are a descendant of Cherokee Freedmen, you are most likely already aware of the fact that you have an incredibly rich history. There are all kinds of files that are out there for you. And I suspect that many of you have already connected with that. You have the enrollment cards, you have interviews, you have those land allotment records. Well, you're probably more than familiar with them, have looked at them numerous times. And of course, some of these are the same records that are used for citizenship today. But beyond the Dawes rolls, beyond those records, are other records that also reflect Cherokee Freedmen history that came before that time. Now, if you're the family genealogist, if you're the one who's recording this data, then you are the family's storyteller. And you need to really see yourself in that role. And as the storyteller, you know how important it is to get sources of information from as many places as you can that will help you enhance that story. And this does include those records that came before the Dawes era, before the late 1890s into the earliest 20th century. So, in this episode, we're going to look at a set of records that you can find. There are a lot of ledgers that many people have never ever bothered to explore, and they're right there at your fingertips. Now, there's a collection of records called Cherokee Freedmen Rolls and Indexes. Now, first of all, look at the years. It says 1867 to 1897. Well, that's a big span of years over a 30-year period. These records actually, original records exist in Fort Worth, Texas at the Federal Record Center. They are classified as part of Record Group 75. Well, Record Group 75 is the name of the largest record set that has anything to do with the five civilized tribes. And you'll find Record Group 75 records at the National Archives of Washington. You'll find some at Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland. And you find a lot of them, of course, as part of Record Group 75 at the Federal Record Center in Fort Worth, Texas. But these records are found on Ancestry.com. Many of you use Ancestry all the time. Now, one of the things that I encourage people to do is to find a way to get into collections quickly. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where you're in Ancestry, you're trying to find a collection, gee, I just saw that collection yesterday, can't remember what it was called, and you have to click around several times, sometimes more than a dozen times to find the right collection. First of all, if you do a simple look at what Ancestry has, there are a lot of collections that are all preceded with the same title, Oklahoma and Indian Territory. If you do a Google search, just go to google.com and in that search box, type Ancestry followed by a comma and then type Oklahoma and Indian Territory. These are the collections that are going to pop up. One called Indian Censuses and Rolls. One is called Marriage Records, Marriage, Citizenship, and Census Records. And that goes from 1841 to 1927. Of course, the Dawes cards, we're all familiar with those. The land allotment records, I hope that you are looking at those allotment records. Indian photos, from 1850 to 1930. Unfortunately, there are not freedmen included in that collection, although there should be. And you also find some of the records, well, the collection of the Indian Pioneer Papers out of University of Oklahoma. But I want to direct your attention. You already know about Dawes records and the application jackets and the land allotment. Look at that first collection at the top. Indian, excuse me, Indian censuses and rolls. Take a look at that. If you go inside of that collection, you're going to find a lot of things. Now, here's what the search page looks like when you're inside of Ancestry. And you can search by last name. However, it's not always going to reveal what's really inside of there. You see over to the right, it says browse this collection. Well, when you browse that collection, you're going to get some options. Look at all of those options. And by the way, if you have freedmen also from other nations as well, from Oklahoma, there's a Choctaw and Chickasaw Freedmen record, a set of records that you'll find from 1885. But I want to direct your attention to Cherokee Freedmen rolls. It says 1896 to 1897, but there's a lot more to it inside of that if you decide to take a look. And when you click on it, you see, oh, there are three different rolls. Actually, these rolls, these are digitized images. These are actually reels of microfilm. So there are three different reels, but what is inside of those reels? Well, first of all, roll number one. As you can see, page one of 589. That means there are 589 images on that first reel of microfilm. So as you go inside of it, you'll see though, even on that very beginning, you'll see Cherokee Freedmen rolls and indexes 1867 to 1897. But the actual index on the ancestry site says just 2 years, 1896, 1897. But as you get inside of it, you're going to find some other things that are there. So let's look at the beginning of that collection of 589 freedmen, Cherokee freedmen. So you'll see that there's an index, and it's an index to a set of records, the Tompkins Roll of 1867. Have you ever looked at that record? It's something you may want to become familiar with. And as you get inside of it, this is just what page 4 looks like inside of that very large collection. You're going to say, okay, it's some sort of index of some sort. And you can see some of the letters have kind of faded out. But you see, it's referring to the Tompkins Roll, Volume 1. This is a ledger that contains information. Now, a lot of these ledgers that you see on this roll of microfilm are actually typed ledgers. A lot of them were transcribed from the original. But it's still worth looking at, nevertheless. Now, this is what a typical page, it's an index, and you can see there had some pre-printed pages with different parts of the alphabet where you just fill in surname, given name, and it tells you what pages the names will be found on the original Tompkins roll. But as you can see there, the names are handwritten there. Now, as you progress into that reel of microfilm, now most of them, those first 90 or so pages are going to be like that, just going through the alphabet. But then further, go deeper into that 589 page collection. Then you get to something called Cherokee Census Roll, and you see it's freedmen. But these are individuals whose names were placed on the 1880 authenticated roll of Cherokee Freedmen. Now remember, the collection on the outside on Ancestry says, 2 years, 1896, 1897. But here you see an index of authenticated Cherokee Freedmen from 1880. And you actually see the actual ledger that is there. So take a look inside. It's a transcribed list. It's a typed roster, but it's by district in terms of the district where individuals lived in the Cherokee Nation. You can see here the Benjes, Blackstones, Browns, Drews. These are individuals who lived in the Canadian district. And they're by family groups, and it tells you, of course, what their occupation was as well. But if you've never looked at this, you should look at it and just see who is there. Quite possibly your ancestors may be there, and it's by district. So you'll see Delaware district in this case. You saw, I believe, it's Canadian, yes, on the other, and it goes on and on. So you'll see the Flint district, Saline district, Going Snake, Tahlequah. So you'll see quite a lot that's there. As you progress through that collection, we're now on page 157 out of 589. And you see this list of colored persons who are on the Clifton Roll. Now, the Clifton Roll was a roll that was created after the Wallace Roll. Wallace Roll was created, what, 1890, 1891? Clifton Roll was created after that to include people previously on the Wallace Roll, but those who were also missed on the Wallace Roll. So here you, and as it says here, this includes individuals who are not on the authenticated 1880 list as well. And this is a sample page of the list of colored persons, as it's called. And of course, this is an original handwritten ledger that you can actually browse through and take a look. And of course, as you can see at the bottom, this is page 159 out of 589. There's a second volume as you go through this reel of microfilms, the same reel of microfilm. And again, as you can see, it's book 2 of the same thing. As you advance further into the 200s, now you see an index to census rolls. Cherokee Freedmen, 1893. Were you even aware that there was a roll from 1893? Keep in mind what's so important about this. We all know when you do standard research, as you start with census, 1940, 1930, 1920, and so on, you get to 1900, but then you have that 20-year gap because we don't have 1890 census to look at, federal census. But if you're from Indian Territory, you do. Look at this. Right in the middle of that 20-year gap from 1880 to 1900 in the federal census, if you stick to Cherokee Nation records, you're going to find Cherokee Freedmen in 1893. So again, you want to become really curious and get into these records. There's an index to the Wallace Roll. Now we're into the 200s in terms of where we are on this collection. And basically, this is a typed alphabetical order transcription of the Wallace Roll. This is not the actual Wallace Roll itself, because this is what the original Wallace Roll looks like. Many of you have already seen this, and this is available on the National Archives website, nara.gov, and you can take a look at that. And of course, also, these rolls, even though eventually it was not accepted as an official roll, it was not used as a base roll, for example, for those who were applying for land allotments during the Dawes era. But this is still very, very interesting because you see here that this roll between 1890 and 1893, okay, we're not saying that this is what were the years it said, 1896 and 97? Nope, this is that same reel of microfilm under that other classification. But look what it also says here. There are individuals on this list who were never enslaved. They were free Negroes who were also living in the Cherokee Nation, because there were free people of color of African descent who did live there. So it's important to understand that. And again, what's also important, some people might say, well, I just used the original Wallace Roll. You might still want to take a look, because as you look over to the right, it's a transcription, yes. But look, you get occasionally someone died, and it gives you the exact date of death that someone died. Died October 17th, 1894. I'm looking at John Alberti. He was part of Jerry Alberti's family. And it gives you an exact date of death. You may not have that information any other place. And it mentions that, by the way, John was the wife of, what is that? The wife of, oh, I see, Carrie, who also died, who was the wife of Benjamin Sanders. So that's really good information, because if you're studying the Alberti family, you don't know who Carrie married, but it tells you right there she was the wife of Benjamin Sanders. Useful information. Are you aware that there's something called the questioned list? Well, as you can see, there was. And of course, I'm further into this reel of microfilm. Note at the bottom, this is image number 550 of 589. And the questioned list, it tells you what their original Wallace Roll number was, and you see the individuals who are on this list. And the reason why they were questioned. Over to the right, you can see the remarks. No evidence that he or his parents were slaves of Cherokees. And you'll see some other comments vouched for as the child of Gesso and Jane Alberti, but no evidence to identify the parents as slaves of Cherokees. So you find some really good information that's there. And again, just another image from the questioned list. And we're into the 500s of a 500 plus, 580 plus page collection. This is real number one that we're talking about. There's a supplemental schedule. Yep, there's a supplemental schedule. Schedule is another word for when you're talking genealogy or a census list. That's basically what schedule means. And the supplemental schedule of the names of Cherokee Freedmen. This is a supplement to the Wallace Roll. And many people are not even aware that there was a supplement to the Wallace Roll. And it was also transcribed, as you can see, this typed list. Now, let's go on to the second row of microfilm. Remember, when you click on that list from Ancestry, you see that there were 3 reels of microfilm. Well, on the second one, you'll see some more information. This is an index to the Freedmen Roll of 1896. So you got to get to roll 2 before you even get to the years that are represented by the name of the collection. Cherokee Freedmen, 1896 and 1897. Finally, a roll 2, you finally get to an 1896 set of documents. And you'll see that there's an index to that roll itself. And of course, it's a transcribed list. As you go further into the collection, now this collection has 630 images in it. And you'll see that it's ranged by district, and then within the district, it is alphabetical. And this is the ledger, the copy of the ledger itself. And of course, useful information that is there. And again, the reason why you want to know about these, you might say, well, it's just a list of names. True, it is just a list of names. But as a genealogist, I would hope that you have an image, let's say in the 20th century, of every census year in which your ancestors can be found. Well, every particular census in which your Cherokee Freedmen ancestors can be found. You want to have those as well for one primary reason. Sometimes the family composition changed. There was a high infant mortality in the 19th century, in the 1890s, early 20th century. Many times individuals died from fever, influenza, tuberculosis, whatever. You may see the names of children that you've never heard of and realize you don't see them in latter years because they were deceased, but now you can find their names. So that's the value of looking at these lists. How many of you are familiar with the strip payment that was given to Cherokee Freedmen? Well, as you go deeper into this 630 page collection, in the middle, on page 154, you'll start to get to that section where you can see individuals who received what they call strip money, or this strip payment roll. And again, it's right there. It's right there for you to find. And it's an alpha list going all the way from the Albertis and the Adams and the Adair all the way up through the Youngblood. So it's excuse me, it's an alphabetical list. There's the payment roll of 1897. You can find out, wow, did my ancestors go? Keep in mind, many times they had to go and they had to travel. They weren't just sitting around in their community going to the local post office to talk to someone. They had actually maybe travel, in some cases, maybe to telephone, but in many cases they had to go to the Skokie area office to go and receive a payment, or to go and to have their name inscribed on some of the census rolls that were collected. So this meant that there was an effort on the part of your ancestors to be included. They were just as serious as any other unit in the nation to be counted and to receive what was their birthright. So as you look here on the Freedmen Payment Roll, 1897, we're now in the middle of the collection, 355, page 355, or image number 355 out of 630. And of course, you can see that this is the actual payment roll. you can actually see the names handwritten of the individuals. Now, it doesn't say on many of these pages how much they were paid. On some other pages, as you go more deeply into this set, you will find some that will actually tell you how much they received. And usually they were small amounts, $10, $12, $5, but it's still there. There's the 1896 report. Now notice this is image number 542 out of a 600 plus page collection. And you see this 1896 transcription here, and just telling you who individuals are. And there were individuals who were turned down put on a rejected list, and then there's a supplement to the rejected list. You really need to go through these records, and they're not always going to come up in terms of having been indexed. So all the more reason why you want to go and look page by page, because sometimes you also learn about the community and can see how the community grew over the years. When you get to roll 3 of this 3-roll collection, you finally get to the Kern Clifton roll of Cherokee Freedmen. And basically, this is all that roll 3 consists of, is the Kern Clifton roll. This was, was sort of an addendum to the Wallace roll of 1890, and included other names of individuals. So you can take a look at that. You as a researcher are just encouraged to explore these records. These should really help you in documenting more information about your family and to really expand that story. I encourage you to expand your family's narrative, how they were represented in these lesser known records that expanded multiple decades. So all this just to say is to put your family back on the historical landscape where they lived by exploring Cherokee Freedmen records that came before the Dawes era. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.